Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're diving deep into Kant's Critique of Practical Reason. Sounds heavy? Don't worry, I've got your back. So what's Kant all about? In this work, he tackles ethics and morality, showing us how reason should guide our actions. Imagine a moral compass that's totally grounded in rational thought. Kant argues that we should act according to universal laws, like treating others how we want to be treated. But here's the kicker. It's not just about following rules. It's about our intentions too. So how does this apply to us today? Well, it's all about making choices that aren't just good for us, but for everyone. Introduction. Immanuel Kant's Critique of Practical Reason, 1788, is a seminal work in moral philosophy that builds upon the foundation laid by his earlier work, Critique of Pure Reason. In this second critique, Kant explores the principles of practical reason and the role of moral law in human action. Unlike the first critique, which focused on the limits of human cognition and the nature of experience, this work concerns itself with ethical reasoning and the foundations of moral obligation. Through this critique, Kant aims to establish a systematic and rational basis for moral law, independent of empirical contingencies. This essay provides an in-depth analysis of the key arguments, themes, and implications of the text, while incorporating relevant passages to illustrate Kant's philosophical contributions. It will examine the primacy of practical reason over theoretical reason, the nature of the moral law, and the categorical imperative, the relationship between freedom and autonomy, and the postulates of practical reason, including the necessity of God and immortality for moral commitment, the primacy of practical reason. One of the central theses of Kant's Critique of Practical Reason is that practical reason, which governs moral action, holds primacy over theoretical reason, which concerns itself with knowledge and understanding. Kant argues that while theoretical reason is bound by the limits of experience, practical reason transcends those limits to establish the principles of morality. He famously states, "Two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and awe, the starry heavens above me and the moral law within me." This passage highlights the dual nature of Kantian philosophy, emphasizing the profound and universal nature of moral law as a guide for human conduct. Theoretical reason is restricted by empirical evidence and remains incapable of making claims about things in themselves. In contrast, practical reason is not limited in the same way. It provides the necessary conditions for moral obligation and allows us to conceive of moral laws as universally binding principles. Kant's argument for the primacy of practical reason over theoretical reason also reflects his broader project of establishing moral law as an a priori necessity rather than a contingent fact derived from experience. He criticizes earlier moral theories, such as utilitarianism and sentimentalism, for grounding ethics in consequences or emotions rather than in the rational structure of duty itself. The concept of the moral law and the categorical imperative. At the heart of Kant's ethical system is the notion of the moral law, which he argues is determined by reason alone. Unlike contingent, empirical laws, the moral law is absolute and binding for all rational beings. Kant formulates this law through his well-known categorical imperative, which he expresses as follows: "Act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law." This principle demands that individuals act in a way that their actions could be universally applied, without contradiction. Kant contrasts this with hypothetical imperatives, which depend on specific desires and goals, arguing that morality must be rooted in duty rather than personal inclination. The categorical imperative provides a formal test for determining the moral worth of an action, by asking whether the principle underlying the action can be universalized without contradiction. Kant offers several formulations of the categorical imperative, each emphasizing different aspects of moral law. The formula of universal law. This formulation requires individuals to assess their maxims, rules of action, in terms of universal applicability. the formula of humanity as an end in itself. This emphasizes the inherent dignity of rational beings, stating that individuals must never be treated merely as means to an end, but always as ends in themselves. The formula of the kingdom of ends. This envisions a community of rational beings who legislate universal moral law together, acting as both sovereigns and subjects. Through these formulations, Kant argues that moral actions are those that can be rationally willed as universal laws, while respecting the intrinsic worth of all rational beings. Freedom, autonomy, and the moral will. Kant's discussion of moral freedom is another key aspect of the critique of practical reason. He asserts that true freedom is not found in acting according to one's desires, but rather in autonomy, or self-legislation, according to rational moral principles. This means that moral agents are free precisely because they act in accordance with reason rather than being slaves to their impulses. Kant states, a free will and a will under moral laws are one and the same. Thus, freedom in the Kantian sense is not the absence of constraint, but the ability to act according to the universal moral law. He argues that an action is only truly moral if it is performed out of a sense of duty, rather than from external influences or inclinations. This places Kant in contrast with moral theories that equate freedom with the ability to pursue one's desires, regardless of their rational justification. Kant further develops the idea of autonomy by distinguishing from heteronomy. While an autonomous will follows moral law as determined by reason, a heteronomous will is guided by external factors, such as pleasure, fear, or social convention. By emphasizing autonomy, Kant establishes a moral framework where individuals are both the authors and the subjects of the moral law. The postulates of practical reason, God and immortality. While Kant's critical philosophy denies that theoretical reason can prove the existence of God, he argues that practical reason requires belief in God and the immortality of the soul as necessary postulates for moral action. He writes, morality inevitably leads to religion, through which it extends itself to the idea of a powerful moral legislator outside the human being as the final end of all things. According to Kant, belief in God and an afterlife provides the necessary framework for the ultimate realization of moral virtue and justice, ensuring that moral effort is not in vain. The postulates of practical reason do not function as metaphysical proofs, but as necessary conditions for the possibility of moral perfection. Without an afterlife, Kant argues, the full realization of moral virtue would be impossible. Likewise, the existence of a moral God ensures that justice is ultimately upheld in a way that is beyond the limitations of human experience. Conclusion. Kant's critique of practical reason remains a cornerstone of modern ethical thought, emphasizing duty, autonomy, and the universality of moral law. By asserting the primacy of practical reason and its role in guiding moral action, Kant establishes a framework that continues to influence contemporary debates on ethics and philosophy. His categorical imperative and his conception of freedom provide a powerful argument for a morality based on reason rather than sentiment or utility. Furthermore, his insistence on autonomy as the basis of morality challenges traditional moral theories that depend on external authorities or consequences. Through this work, Kant solidifies his position as one of the most important moral philosophers in history, offering a system that continues to challenge and inspire generations of thinkers. By exploring the limits and capabilities of practical reason, Kant ultimately provides a vision of morality that is both rational and universal, rooted in the very structure of human reason itself. Hit that like button if this helps you out, and don't forget to subscribe for more philosophical fun.